The Ottoman Empire stands as one of history's largest and longest-lasting empires, enduring for an impressive 623 years from 1299 to 1922. It extended its influence across 3 continents, covering the Balkans in southeastern Europe, Arabia and Central Asia, and coastal northern Africa. Like many of the great empires that preceded it, the Ottoman Empire was fundamentally built on the institution of slavery. However, what distinguishes the Ottoman approach from many other historical examples is the fact that the majority of their slaves were white. The scale and scope of slavery in the Ottoman Empire. Slavery in the Ottoman Empire was a practice that spanned the entirety of its existence, continuing even after attempts were made to abolish it in the late 19th century. Particularly during the empire's earlier centuries, slaves were captured during military raids or through politically orchestrated expeditions ordered by the Sultan. These raids swept across southern and eastern Europe, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, with a significant proportion of the captives being transported to the capital, Constantinople, known today as Istanbul. Additionally, from the 16th to the 19th centuries, a substantial number of Europeans, amounting to hundreds of thousands, were seized by Barbary pirates and sold into slavery within the Ottoman Empire, although the Ottomans themselves did not directly engage in these raids. At the height of this practice, it is estimated that 1 in 5 residents of Constantinople were slaves. This situation bore a resemblance to the Roman Empire, which the Ottomans had succeeded. This represents the largest known instance of white slavery in history, although it has been studied far less extensively than the transatlantic African-American slave trade. Comparison with other historical empires. In many ways, the Ottoman Empire mirrored the infamous Christian Crusades, led by figures such as Richard the Lionheart, who marched across Europe to forcibly convert people to Christianity and claim their lands. The Ottoman Empire conducted similar operations, albeit under the banner of Islam. Rather than imposing Christianity, the Ottomans captured Eastern Europeans and young Christian boys, converting them to Islam and drafting them into a special branch of the Ottoman military known as the Janissaries, which will be discussed in greater detail later. Although religion and a desire for retribution played roles in these Ottoman raids, the pursuit of financial gain was a far more significant driving force behind the enslavement of individuals from conquered regions. The economic and political role of slavery. Slavery in the Ottoman Empire was not just a means of labor, but a central pillar in the empire's economic and political structure. The wealth and power of the Ottoman elite were often directly tied to their ownership of slaves, who were used to staff estates, manage households, and even run large agricultural operations. The reliance on slaves allowed the Ottoman elite to maintain their wealth without engaging directly in commerce or manual labor, which was often seen as beneath their status. Moreover, slaves played a crucial role in the military and administrative machinery of the empire. The Janissaries, who were elite soldiers drawn from enslaved Christian boys, formed the backbone of the Ottoman military. Similarly, many high-ranking officials in the Ottoman administration, known as the Kul system, were technically slaves of the Sultan, although they wielded immense power and influence. The perspectives on slavery within the Ottoman Empire. Many of the sources that document slavery in the Ottoman Empire originate from white, Christian, Western Europeans, who were far removed from the actual life within the empire. As a result, the accuracy of these accounts is difficult to fully ascertain, as they are often influenced by the cultural biases and perspectives of those who did not directly experience Ottoman society. However, the few accounts that do come from within the empire provide us with rare and valuable insights into how slavery was perceived and practiced by the Ottomans themselves. It is important to recognize that Muslims held a fundamentally different view of slavery compared to other nations and religions that were involved in the slave trade. The Quran advises that slaves should be treated with kindness and encourages manumission, or the freeing of slaves who have demonstrated loyalty. According to the Quran, slaves are considered to have the same moral standing as their masters, although they hold a lower legal status. Additionally, slaves were not legally distinguished by their skin color in Islamic law. Despite this, there were notable disparities in the slave market, where individuals with disabilities and those with darker skin tones from sub-Saharan Africa were often sold for significantly less than their healthy, white counterparts. The economics of slavery in the Ottoman Empire. Slaves in the Ottoman Empire were generally expensive, typically owned by high-ranking officials who paid the highest prices for virginal European girls aged between 13 and 25, as well as for healthy teenage boys. Despite the high costs associated with owning slaves, court records reveal that it was not only the elite who possessed slaves. They were widespread throughout Ottoman society. Slaves worked in a variety of roles, including domestic service, agriculture, trade, military service, and were also forced into sexual slavery. White women generally held positions within households, often being assigned higher-profile tasks such as managing the home and caring for the ladies of the house. In contrast, African slaves were usually given the more menial tasks. Male slaves often worked as laborers or farmhands. However, domestic and labor slaves rarely remained in bondage for their entire lives. Many were able to use their years in slavery as a means of social mobility. Social mobility and slavery. Further examination of court records indicates that citizens of the Ottoman Empire often adhered to certain Islamic principles regarding slavery. It was common for masters to free their slaves upon the master's death or even before. Typically, slaves who were black experienced around 7 years of bondage, while white slaves were held for about 9 years, after which they were often freed if they had demonstrated loyalty. Upon gaining their freedom, these individuals usually advanced in their respective fields, often becoming foremen or overseers. As freed individuals, they became contract workers or clients of their former masters, earning wages for their labor. Evidence from Sharia court records suggests that newly freed slaves were generally accepted into Ottoman society, particularly in smaller towns, where they enjoyed a significant degree of economic and social independence. The dark side of slavery, the sexual slave trade. However, there was a darker aspect to slavery in the Ottoman Empire, which was already a grim institution: the sexual slave trade. This trade can be divided into two main categories: young girls who were captured during war raids or sold into slavery by their impoverished families, and those who were placed in the imperial harem. The less fortunate female sex slaves were expected to be sexually available to their male masters, though not to the husbands of their female owners, and were often housed within a harem. Despite the harsh reality of their situation, these women did have certain rights that were not extended to other women in slavery, if that could be considered a form of luck. For instance, if a harem slave became pregnant, she could not be sold into further slavery, and she would be granted freedom upon her master's death. Moreover, any child she bore would be born free and could not be sold or given away. Sexual slavery of boys. Young boys also fell victim to sexual slavery, although they typically worked in bathhouses or coffee houses. To modern sensibilities, it may seem strange that being sold into sexual slavery was not always seen as entirely negative. In fact, while many were tragically sold into this life out of desperation and poverty, a significant number were sold with the intention of taking advantage of the social mobility that came with the position, particularly if they secured a role within the imperial harem. Most of the accounts regarding the imperial harem are highly sensationalized, filled with exaggeration and lacking substantial evidence, especially those written by Western authors. This is largely due to the fact that even many Ottoman citizens themselves were unaware of what transpired within the imperial harem, as those within were kept isolated from society and sworn to secrecy. The role of concubines in the imperial harem. Slaves within the imperial harem, known as concubines, often used their positions as a means of social mobility. They enjoyed greater freedom and luxuries than many free individuals, although they were still slaves. Guarded around the clock by black eunuch slaves, they held positions of power and had the potential to marry high-ranking officials or even become one of the Sultan's wives. During the period from 1533 to 1636, some of these women wielded significant political influence, often having the ear of powerful men. However, despite the appearance of voluntary submission, these women were still forced to comply with the desires of the men around them, with no choice in the matter. Limited sources suggest that very few harem slaves were ever freed from their roles as concubines. The Janissaries, slavery, and military power. Now, let's take a step back to the 14th century and focus on the young boys who served in the Ottoman military branch, known as the Janissaries. The Janissaries were young boys taken as a form of blood tax, known as devshirme, at the conclusion of battles, and assimilated into the elite ranks of the Ottoman army. This practice was justified by the Sultan under Islamic law, which entitled the Sultan to 1/5 of the spoils collected in battle. Beginning with the third Sultan, Murad I, humans were considered a legitimate part of this booty. Once captured, these boys were forcibly circumcised, converted to Islam, and subjected to rigorous training as part of a slave soldier regiment. They underwent extreme discipline, which transformed them into highly focused and elite soldiers. The role and rules of the Janissaries. The Janissaries were bound by strict rules. They were forbidden to grow beards or marry before the age of 40, and were expected to demonstrate absolute loyalty to the emperor. In return, they received wages, were supported during battles, and became one of the first military regiments to train in the use of firearms in the late 14th century. In some cases, parents even bribed officials to take their children into the Janissary ranks, hoping to elevate their family's socio-economic status. By the 1600s, the demand for Janissary troops had surpassed the number of boys available through the devshirme system. Consequently, the exclusive conscription of boys through devshirme was abolished, allowing free-born Muslims to join the Janissaries and take advantage of the opportunity to improve their social and economic standing. The devshirme system, a unique aspect of Ottoman slavery. The devshirme system, which translates to blood tax or child levy, was one of the most unique and controversial aspects of slavery in the Ottoman Empire. This system involved the forcible recruitment of Christian boys from the Balkans, who were then converted to Islam and trained as Janissaries. These boys, often as young as 8, were taken from their families and brought to the capital, where they were educated, converted to Islam, and trained in various disciplines. The devshirme system was not universally hated. In some cases, families saw it as an opportunity for their children to rise to positions of power and influence within the empire. However, it was also a source of resentment and fear, as it represented the loss of children and the imposition of Ottoman control over Christian populations. The eunuchs, power behind the throne. Another significant group within the Ottoman slavery system was the eunuchs, who played crucial roles within the imperial court, particularly in the harem. Eunuchs were castrated men who were often purchased as slaves or captured during military campaigns. They held a unique position within the empire, serving as trusted servants, administrators, and even advisors to the Sultan. Eunuchs were divided into two main groups: the black eunuchs, who were typically of African origin, and the white eunuchs, who were usually of European descent. The chief black eunuch, known as the Kislar Aga, was one of the most powerful figures in the empire, responsible for the administration of the imperial harem, and often wielding significant influence over the Sultan. The role of slavery in Ottoman society. The concept of white slavery in the Ottoman Empire is complex and cannot be easily categorized, especially when compared to other periods and regions in history. The scarcity of sources leaves us with an incomplete understanding of slavery and the treatment of slaves within the empire. However, what we do know presents a multifaceted and not entirely negative picture, particularly when contrasted with the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery was deeply ingrained in Ottoman society and played a significant role in the empire's social, economic, and political structures. While the practice of slavery was brutal and dehumanizing, it also provided opportunities for social mobility, particularly for those who were able to rise through the ranks of the Janissaries or the imperial harem. The decline and abolition of slavery. The decline of the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century coincided with growing pressure from European powers and internal reformers to abolish slavery. The empire, facing military defeats and internal strife, began to implement a series of reforms known as the Tanzimat, aimed at modernizing the state and aligning it more closely with European norms. As part of these reforms, the Ottoman government took steps to curtail the slave trade, particularly the importation of African slaves. In 1847, the empire officially abolished the slave trade, although the practice of slavery itself continued in various forms until the early 20th century. The abolition of slavery was a slow and uneven process, influenced by both internal and external pressures. The legacy of slavery in the Ottoman Empire. The legacy of slavery in the Ottoman Empire is complex and multifaceted. While the empire's reliance on slavery is often overshadowed by its military conquests and cultural achievements, it remains a significant aspect of Ottoman history. The empire's approach to slavery, particularly its emphasis on social mobility and the integration of slaves into the broader society, sets it apart from other historical examples of slavery. However, this does not diminish the brutality and suffering experienced by those who were enslaved. The Ottoman slave trade, like all forms of slavery, was a system of exploitation and dehumanization that left lasting scars on the societies it touched. In conclusion, the Ottoman Empire's use of slavery was a defining feature of its history, shaping its social, economic, and political structures. While the practice of slavery in the Ottoman Empire was in many ways unique, it was still a system of oppression that exploited countless individuals for the benefit of the ruling class. As we reflect on this dark chapter of history, it is essential to remember the complexities and nuances of the Ottoman slave system, as well as the enduring impact it had on the people and societies involved. If you're interested in exploring more about slavery and other darker aspects of history, be sure to like and subscribe for more intriguing and thought-provoking content.